Welcome to Movies We Like, part of the True Story FM Entertainment Podcast Network. I'm Andy Nelson, and that over there is Pete Wright.
It is confirmed, Pete Wright.
On today's episode, we have invited production designer Andrew McAlpine to talk about The Power of the Dog, a movie he likes. Andrew, welcome to the show. We are thrilled to have you to chat about not just The Power of the Dog, but about you and your career and get a sense as to everything that you've been doing in this industry. So
extraordinary career.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm pleasure to be here.
Let's I want to get a sense as to your work in your background growing up in New Zealand, starting in or getting to the point where you started in production design, because it didn't sound like that's exactly where you started, right?
No, I started originally, I wanted to be a surgeon. I wanted to be in the medical world. Then I discovered my tribe, soul tribe, wasn't amongst those students. So I went to a place called art school, which I didn't knew anything about it, but I'd always drawn and painted, and I'd won a big scholarship a couple of years before to go to Japan and live in Japan for a few months, blah, blah, blah. So all of a sudden I had to do a vault and find myself. That led to 4 years then, in which case I found my tribe and I loved it. I came out of it thinking, and I got a wonderful A pass. And I thought painting's my thing. I loved it. I still love it. I'm in love with it. But I couldn't foresee myself wanting to be a lone artist working in a studio, producing paintings in the readiness to put them on walls where people might want to come. I wanted to have more of a community experience. I didn't know this. I left art school and spent a year doing wonderful paintings. But in doing so, I discovered that artistry is a lonely thing unless you find somewhere that you can share it. That led me quickly into an area that I didn't know anything about, but I did actually. I had done 2 or 3 shows on my own volition to do with theater. It led me to going to theater, and I happened to be able to work with a young director who was doing shows straight out of New York or straight out of London, and I fell in love with that. I found my tribe there, my second tribe. That led me to doing a postgraduate in England. Meanwhile, I was working in holography, early days of holography, and I've remained within that family, that world, because the way of looking at the world is very occupied by a very narrow form of viewing the realities, I think, driven by commerce, be it war or be it whatever. There's a focus on moralities, which didn't really help an artist to find his or her strength. So I did that, and I founded a theatre company in London, which took up the next 7 years. We work directly with communities. Community is a big part of my soul thinking. It is somewhere that it goes right into my movies. I make movies around community. That's why I've chosen Power of the Dog. And the community is one of the cements in the area that I'm most interested in. Meanwhile, I was being followed by people in the film world, but you couldn't get into the film world if you were people like myself, age 24, 25, because there was a four-wall system in Britain whereby unless you were part of a family, you couldn't. There's a mafioso situation. So I had been working in opera and theatre for about 12, 15, 40 years, I think it was. And then Roger Deakins and I and Mike Figgis and a few other people, we said, screw this, we're going to cards. We're out of here. We're going to do it ourselves. We're just going to do it. We're going to make it. And that led really me into film. I had been led in another way by Ken Russell, a wonderful filmmaker here, Ken had asked me, he knew that I was an international mask maker, and he wanted me to make some masks for the film Tommy. I'd never been in a film studio at that point because I couldn't get into them, but I had this gave me the in to go into. So I was on a stage and I just happened to walk on stage, went, turn over, and Ken was a very, very vocal, fabulous man. And who should walk onto the biggest set, which was a pinball machine, massive piece of thing, but Tina Turner and, oh my goodness, the Hoofer, the wonderful, oh, sorry, I can't remember her name. And they all of a sudden, bang, that was when my epiphany happened. I was in. So I left doing what I did. And fortunately, MTV was just starting up at this point. I did probably, I think I've never counted them because I never look back on things, but I think I did near 2 to 300 rock videos. I mean, I mean, I just in a week, I do 3 in a week. I happened I keep a journal I have for 50 plus years. And recently I pulled out one of them because I've never looked in them because I'm not interested in looking in them particularly. And it said, shoot, prep Saturday, shoot, prep Saturday, prep Sunday, get ready to shoot George Michael Monday, Tuesday. And then Wednesday, I shot a commercial, which was another ongoing and get me going. And then on prep Thursday and shoot Black Sabbath Friday and Saturday. And I don't know any more than that because I've never looked at any of those journals again. But I'm thinking of finding out. Look, I was lucky. I met the people I need. I met the muscle that I needed to meet. The the cutting edge people. So that led to doing Stormy Monday with Melanie Griffiths and Sting and a lot of people with Mike Figgis, which quickly led into doing Sid and Nancy and Aristos. Yeah, so that's how it all happened.
Wow.
I'm so interested in the transition points, right? When you're confronted with the transom of, I've been doing this now for the theatrical stage. There's something that's appealing about the gap and the uncertainty about what's on the other side of it that draws you into film. Can you take us back to that point when you had to make that decision that I think my career lies not in what was it, the Commonwealth, in for 7 years. It's gonna be on on screen of some sort. Do you remember making that decision?
Yes, I was frustrated in theater and I was doing very experimental and very successful opera where I was using the cutting edge. I was working with a lighting designer from La Mama in New York, wonderful, wonderful guy. And I was introduced to the possibility of being able to bring into coalition the dreams that I had to do, which required a technological, I love technology. So I love the exactitude of it. I like the behavior of it all. I go to the theater more than I go to cinema, I'm afraid, because I still love the black hole that I sit in. And then I'm introduced to some extraordinary journey takes place in front of me. But that is more of an emotional experience virtually, and an intellectual one, obviously, and a political one. But, I walked away from that. I thought to myself and I've never gone back. I've been asked to go back to do it, but cinema gives me the edges that I want, and holography was a very particular it was a very, very strict formatting of what reality was, and I think we'll talk a little bit about what personal reality for any artist might well be.
Yeah. Real quick before we move on, I'm just curious, can you explain what holography is? I know you're very passionate about it. You've got a display in a museum featuring your work with it. What exactly are you doing in that space?
Well, we look in 4 dimensions all the time, or 3 to 4 dimensions, and we don't realize because it's been sort of hijacked by the churches, historically the churches who position things up in front of us in stained glass windows on murals on walls and et cetera, or in galleries. So it became an experience within a frame, and a small frame quite often. And I know that my life, as I look out the window in front of me here, is full of all the ingredients that make up my uh, mind having, uh, I'm, I'm not, I could see, and it's a way of seeing. Now that I was working, as you know, I've told you in that industry previously, with the very, very good cinematography, Deacon's been one of them. I mean, he and we did a lot of together. And, the, hmm, the holography still was in its infancy. And so I was working, and a friend of mine introduced me to The Who, the band The Who. And Pete Townsend had gone to art school, and he was very interested. He's a very, very bright man, Pete Townsend from The Who. And I got him to fund I was at university, I was at one university doing my master's degree, but about half an hour away, there was another technical uh, university called Loughborough University, and a guy called Professor Mike Phillips, yeah. And he was working, but we only had the rudimentary things that he could rustle up. So I got The Who to put 50 grand. This is in 1970, 50,000 pounds, in 1973. And we built I, about a foot deep, big concrete stable table, basically. It gave us the stability to everything in those days because we were using very small lasers to capture. So that is what we did. Now, what I brought to the game was the storytelling. Previous to that, the holograms we made at Loughborough were all chemical elements or things that people could look at and go, "No, yeah, okay, so big deal, so what?" Yeah, not even museum pieces. They were just sort of experimental things, and they didn't know how to take the next step forward. Well, coming from my background, cut to the chase, there's two holograms that have gone into the V&A, one of which is a pair of, look, the little red shoes that Judy Garland wore, within the psyche of everybody who's seen that movie, A Generation, and it's gone on and on. So I found there's a little pair of shoes, I mean, the tiny little ones, and they had diamante heels on them, which was a sort of requirement because the light required to come off them. So we made that was a groundbreaking hologram. And that is one whereby people could look at it and they had an emotional relationship with the subject because you can look into it and you can see the maker of the shoe. You can look down into the shoe. You can do all the things that a child does when they're looking at a locust or whatever. So it's got a very strong sense of existence as we know it, but in a formatted way. And of course, it's gone on to become. I then got a Gulbenkian grant to try and get this ready to put on stage. The Who decided they didn't want to go on the road. Couldn't we just do what ABBA now does in London? I mean,
Right.
we're talking 40 years later. They finally got the technology to do it. So it's part of what we'll talk about in The Power of the Dog, the way of seeing a story so that it has an emotional blowback to the viewer.
Fascinating.
And so at this point, like in the work that you've done, you haven't been able to incorporate any of your holography in your cinematic production.
No, because then they're different processes.
Yeah.
No,
I just
haven't-
want I have this image of like, what is the next, what's the next hologram look like on screen? Because now, I mean, we sort of diverge points, but you kind of imagine in 1976 seeing "Help Me, Obi-Wan Kenobi" as an actual hologram would be really fun. But
Yeah, I mean, it's
paths
commonplace
diverge.
in that world now. It's on our credit cards. We
Yeah.
know it's everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
everybody
right.
knows about it, but that's the lowest ranking holography. But
Right.
it is got a deep chronology, which is incredibly coded. It's got a long, deep history, which we're only just starting out on it.
Yeah.
And of course, the ABBA show, whereby people sit in an auditorium, as it were, on an ABBA audience, and then you swear that that is ABBA on the stage. I mean, it is an
Right.
incredible piece of. It's not. It's not. It is what people just can't believe themselves. They do.
Yeah. Amazing.
So that's a form of tomorrowness that is already with us today, and that is an important part of why people are struggling at the moment, because this has been going on for quite a long time now. Well, I mean, the 70s, 80s, 90s, these were very inventive periods of time. Just we got to remember that you know Stockhausen was composing, and geodesic domes were being built. I mean, there was so much consciousness about what the world could be. Now that world has sort of been sublimated by wealth by the people who own it, and it is not. Whereas I told you I love community because I think community is where the stories come from. That is where the heart of the stories. The family is the heart of the storytelling. Grandma, grandpa, mama, sister, brother. All of this stuff is the matrix of the stuff that. Now, I'm not saying that that's only one part of cinema, but it's an important part of cinema, which I think gives nourishment.
Well, and that's an important part of it. Obviously, the family of your crew that you're going to be working with, and you've worked. You already mentioned like Roger Deakins. You worked on Sid and Nancy with Roger Deakins, who shot that one. You worked on the piano with Jane Campion. We're talking about The Power of the Dog here in a minute. I mean, Spike Lee with Clockers, Jodie Foster, Home for the Holidays, Danny Boyle, The Beach, all the way up through most recently Kristen Scott Thomas and My Mother's Wedding. A wide variety of projects, a wide variety of different people that you've been working with over the decades. But I think that there's always in any crew that you're going to be working with that sense of family. You're all kind of building together to find to work toward that united purpose of creating the director's vision. How, as far as like finding your way into those relationships with your crew, I mean, obviously the director and their vision is kind of the central focus that everyone is working on. But what's your approach to kind of stepping into something and finding the working relationship with the cinematographer and the costume designer and all of
Oh,
these other people whose elements certainly affect kind of what we're going to finally see on the screen?
that crew, the choice of crew is extremely important to me. I take crew with me from one to the next, but they're not always available. So
Yeah.
I love working with young people. I've always liked working with young people. They bring with them, particularly in the last 15 years, a technological confidence, which is extremely important because it's time saving for me, but also it gets quickly to a visionary point where the director can start looking at what my imaging is from normally previously done mood boards and you can look at it. But when you really want to do visionary stuff, I mean, what you want to do is quickly get it on the table for the director and the producers to look at to see truly what maybe is going on. And that's when the sauce starts to go into the saucepan to stir it up and make it. Now, that means that I need to get crews with me. Now, just a little bit of history in this is that you get a script and you decide you want to make it. Your agent does, go to outlicensing, and you get the gig. But simultaneously, when you're requested to design very quickly what the movie's going to become, you're also crewing. It is completely ridiculously difficult because you want to get those who are the best in the industry come with you to quickly get to the point that what you personally are trying to drive through all the time, and you will be driving that point through so they understand where you are coming from. And that can be the musical composer, it can be certainly the costume designer, and of course the cinematographer and the prop master and all the other people, the set decorator. These are people who are very close to me. I mean, I'm really and because I come from theater and opera, I actually come from a family. Uh, you start a void in theater. And Jane Campion incidentally used to call me McVoid because I'm never afraid of the void. I'm never afraid of nothingness because into nothingness you throw your ideas and your imagination,
I love
etc.
that. Yeah.
I'm curious how you manage the I mean the properties that you've worked on are vastly different, and you've picked a film that is quite similar in tone to the sort of minimalist austere sort of filmmaking like the piano, and yet in the same breath, I have to mention you also were on Aeon Flux, which is a vastly different sci-fi world building, visual effects, scale, a lot of abstraction. Do you approach these properties from a production design perspective with a similar kind of aesthetic or model? How do you separate the two, or do you?
No, I don't, because there's a politic of I was trained, I did my postgraduate in theater,
Hmm.
in design, and incidentally, I'm married to a production designer, which is a woman called Gemma Jackson, whom I'm sure you've heard of. She who designed Game of Thrones
Right,
and blah blah
right.
blah. And we both we never read each other's scripts. We hardly ever talk about what the other person's doing, because it's not. It doesn't matter getting in the way, but we share an approach which is really to do with the family. It's what the time we've got to do it, and to be sure that it's a nourishment. It's a nourishment from working together with people. And that, let's talk about Aeon Flux. That arose. It had a controversial birth because Paramount was in yet another point of its own history being sold, and they didn't quite know what to do. Charlize didn't come onto it. She got Oscar that year, and they snapped her within 12 hours of that Oscar. So all
Wow.
of a sudden, it was all a go, go, go. I had done a lot of prep on that, and I'm pretty rigid. Not rigid, but I don't understand, and I'll never understand why the future seems to be always out there in a cold steel world. Who said that is a cold steel world? For me, it's not. It is a world of color. It's a world of natural growth. Who says that I was looking at on a beach on the weekend. I said, Gemma, look at that beautiful. There's a little oyster shells growing off a rock. It was about, I don't know, foot by foot. There was this amazement. I mean, one's eye just got drawn into this format of wonderful growth. And I said, look, why aren't the spaceships? They're in space. Surely they're gathering shit all the time in space. Why aren't they
Right.
sort of dragging green matter or red matter for that matter or whatever? Why aren't they interesting rather than being this cold engineering all the time? Why
Right.
isn't it that the interiors of them, and they aren't, and I hope I did this, from the most glamorous sort of bedroom you could ever imagine, da, 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 to places where children run, where they want to hide when they want to do it. If you're in space, you're going to, this is my imagination going, yeah, you're going to want to have a little hidey hole. You want to go away. You want to be able to think about your family. You want to be able to be on your own. You want to read a book or whatever. And so in answer to your question, they don't differ for me. It comes from the same central muscle of wanting to be, whether it's Home for the Holidays or The Piano or other historical films that I've done. It's the same rigid, I wouldn't call it rigid, but it is a virtually a philosophy of mine to be sure that I can find the interior arrow that's going to come out and inform the audience on the journey they're on. Spike was very interesting on that. He, you know, he hadn't worked. I don't know. I don't really. He hadn't worked with the likes of Andrew, a white man, and he had, because he had. He worked with John Killick as producer. Blah blah blah. But the creative process was something which Spike is such a brilliant man. Such a brilliant man. He's so involved in his requirements of telling the story. And that for me was a most wonderful experience to have. But of course, I said to him that I want to bring color. There's a lot of color in that film because the life of the youth was not colorful. It was sitting out waiting around to just cut the deal. This was a life of no color. So these are philosophical, spiritual things, that choices you make. So when you go into spaces with the youth, or they are highly colored, highly graphic locations. So answering your question, it always comes from the same muscle. I want to say a little bit about that though, and it's very short. You'll notice that I try to do films where the gun is not the item of discovery in the film. Now, I would say that with Spike, that was very the politic of the fact that what the youth got to learn was that selling crack to their aunties and uncles who were in their 30s, who were the parents, there was no money to be made in that. There was whereas you could get a gun, you could pack it in your lunchbox, and you could roll that gun, sell that gun for a year's worth of crack sales. So there was a particular point, and what Spike had said to me when he started that movie, when I first met with him, was that I want to put an end to the black on black shooting each other, which was coming out of LA at that point. So I had a remit from Spike on that, but I have very few guns in my films because for me it is a spoiler. I don't think people generally in their lives, unless you're a hunter or something, you don't have guns particularly, but we are told that guns are a requirement to keep ourselves safe. No gun keeps you safe. Every gun is designed to kill something. So there is that is a very strong part of my ethic. Um, I'm not against people having guns for the right reasons for having guns, but I think it's become an industry of horror. So I think it deadens the experience of it. One little thing I'd like to say, that there's a young designer called Luke Hull, and Luke has designed Andor, for example. And
Yes.
Luke
Okay. Yeah.
did about 4 or 5 movies with me. I'm not going to take credit for this, but what I'm loving about Luke's work is that he's using real things. Red brick, for example, the city I'm in is made up of red brick, and he's using things that are commonplace to make a world of world that he creates. I'm so proud of him that he has been able to. We talk to each other a lot, quite a lot, just to sort of try and pass the baton on that there is a design ethic, you might call it, which I try to, and Jim and my wife does too.
Yeah. Sure.
Well, I think that's one of the things that I mean, you call out Andor. One of the things that I love so much is, yeah, there's a Steve Jobs quote where, he's talking about how he learned the aesthetic of design, and he's talking about, I think, his father saying, we always polish and stain the back of the drawers and the back of the furniture, right? I know nobody's going to see it, but I know it's there. One of the things I love about your films, and as you talk about Andor, is that we're seeing places where people exist that we might not normally see. In the Star Wars universe, we certainly don't see these back alleys very often, but they look as authentic and real as anything else we could have, more authentic and real than anything else in the universe of Star Wars. Same thing goes for so much of the work that you do through evoking emotion and mood through this sort of realism, minimalism, isolation on objects and spaces, uh, that really feel like you're designing for nature and silence, right? Like not to put words in your mouth, but it feels like I'm learning your language through your films.
Do you know part of that is being born at the bottom of planet Earth? New Zealand is a long way, way, way from anything else. So that the aesthetic that you grow up with is a rolling hills, big growth, a lot of beauty, a lot of, and PR, there's a lot of water. I was never more than 5 or 6 miles from a beach. You learn to live in the landscape. You learn to live on your own. I would cycle on my own for hours through the landscape. Uh, so I mean, no, it's because you're a kid and then you're growing up and you don't really know, but it gave me an incredible uh, foresight into the future of what it became my future. And it is, I mean, Grant Major, who's designed Power of the Dog, Grant, again, is a wonderful designer, and he has done many, many great films which show New Zealand for what it be, which is a big, rolling, contradictory 2 islands, one of which is green and nearly subtropical, and the southern one, which is blasted by a winter that is hugely cold and snowy, and then a summer which is Mediterranean. I mean, it's an extraordinarily big landscaping area. But landscape, if you're born into a landscape, I wasn't born into a city landscape. I've lived in this city now for most of my life. I love it, but it's strange that I do love it because I actually come from the loneliness, you call it, or the aloneness and I was given that like the baton was passed to me, and that really, and without getting into, because I don't want to go too deep into this, but the Maori culture in New Zealand, which is the indigenous people's culture, is an incredibly formatted, fully established, three-dimensional, woven oratory. So I grew up with an existing colonial people pushing away this incredible indigenous existing culture, which feeds you. It feeds you. Culture is one of those things that feed people. They don't even know they've been fed it because they just go to sleep with it. They go home with it. It's the sort of thing that Britain gets when we go to a football game or something like that. There's a culture that really is very much part of a designer's way of thinking, my way of thinking.
Yeah, yeah. I
And
want to,
and this sort of thing I share with deacons and people like that.
yeah, yeah. I want to talk a little bit about, this might be a good question to use then as kind of our transition into talking about the power of the dog, because I want to chat a little bit about the nature of period films. You've had a number of projects that you've worked on, like An Education, even The Piano, where it's a period film, and Power of the Dog also another period film. What is your approach when you're working on something that is a real piece of history? You're designing it though. You're not necessarily just trying to fully capture. I mean, obviously you're finding elements that fit that particular period, but you're still also designing it. What is your approach to kind of crafting, I guess, your own version of that particular period of time?
Uh, it's very it's very particular to myself in that I don't have the arrogance to believe that I could recreate documentary style. I'm not making documents. I'm making entertainment. So I, like a magpie or something, I choose that which is central from the period um, to the storytelling. But for me, it's a clever mixture with my crew of being able to find elements which are quietly complementary to the storytelling, but it's not about period. It's not necessarily like excruciatingly period. I don't particularly, there's a number of films I can tell you that I can't look at because they are trying to sort of, they can't bridge in their mind between what is um, a documentary and what actually should be going on on frame. It's a quiet. I try to find a quiet background, a quiet part of the film. I don't wish to be that. Now, I am surprised myself. I can't work out why. Used to think to myself, I want to do big. I did them in rock videos. I mean, big.
Sure.
But in
Yeah.
truth, I really discover that I've done a lot of movies, but Can Be Home for the Holiday or whatever, which is to do with the psychology of people living in an environment which people can recognize, but I want them to recognize the word. I'm interested in them hearing the word so that they get taken in by the story, not by what I'm doing, even though the music and Andrew's work and that we all combine together to create a meal, a visual meal.
And I think that's what's striking is because, I mean, to your point, there are films that I watch that it's like, wow, they went way over the top. It takes place in the 80s, for example. 80s seems to be an egregious one that people really have a hard time with because it's a fine line of putting so much in that it's like, yeah, you're screaming 80s at me. I get that you're in the 80s, but you didn't need to go so far. And I think that's the line you're talking about, right? Where you're trying to find just enough in a quiet way to represent what's there.
Well, it's such a look. I was in the 80s. The 80s was actually a doldrum period, a strange way. 60s, 70s. The 80s was a pretty dull period in some ways, except I had a great time. That aside, um, what's the mistake a lot of designers make is that they think, "We're in the 80s, so everybody's living there." No. No, 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 no. 97% of people lived proportionately what they could afford to live in the 80s, a little bit. So, a little bit of brass and chrome and blah, blah, blah. But in fact, if you looked at their apartments or their home life or whatever, it was made up of furniture from the 50s or 60s, that even though maybe an older piece of furniture from grandma or something like that. It is not one, it's a licorice, all sorts of every form of. So that's what I researched doing, to be sure that one is quietly able to go into the room or the church or whatever you're doing and be assured by the fact that everything, for example, in my mother's wedding, there is a family home, and everybody, they all grew up in family home. All these women, Scarlett Johansson and Sienna Miller, blah blah blah. They grew up in this home, so their lives have been in this home. So there's some sort of shadowing of their lives um, in the architecture, the choice of colors, and blah blah blah. But the mother has lived alone in that place for quite a long time, and she's an artist in her own right. She's a designer. So there's a form of quiet at-home growth that's taking place, but at the same time, it's growing on the background of what they grew up with, and they come home to. And a lot of people come home. I think in America, it's on average, people seem to move in their lifetime, maybe 4 or 5 times, and from one home to another time, pack it up in the U-Haul and go off and live somewhere else in a different environment. So there is that sort of mix and match sort of quality, which I truly know to be the average case history of where the environment which people live within. For a lot of these movies make a mistake of buying everything. It was like, everybody had to have plastic chairs. No, no,
Right.
no, no, no.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't work that way. Exactly.
Well, not quite. I mean, it does. It does if you're in, maybe, for example, if you're in a sound studio where the equipment has to be of the right period, and that is, it changed throughout history. The chairs that they had, the mixers would be sitting in chairs for weeks on end. So what sort of chair did they have? Did they have a cushion in the chair? Did they have, this sort of. So you get a history. You don't just
Yeah.
put a chair in there. You think about it.
Right. Right.
It's
Right.
so interesting to hear you think, and I'm just sitting here mulling over the '80s. My experience of the '80s as a kid born in the very early '70s, my '80s experience was made up looking very much more like the '70s than I think about. Certainly than I see represented in '80s films, which are vomiting pastel on and multiple layers of popped collars and things. But everything, my parents were still very proud of the first furniture that they bought in the '70s, and the browns and the olives and the rust tones and stripes and things. And I realized we didn't really shake that until the '90s. It took a long time. It takes 20 years to get through major style changes in some
Well,
places.
Bed
That's
Bath&
really
Beyond, I
fascinating.
mean, all these new shops started opening where you could go and get an array of towels, purple towels, and gray towels, whatever, which weren't in that color range that you speak about there. So you could actually add to your environment that which commerce, all of a sudden. I mean, I was living in LA throughout that period, so you could go down the road and you could get amazing, or you could go to farmer's market. When I first got there, you could only buy dyed carnations from Mexico. I mean, the Joe Blow could not get. All of a sudden, farmers markets came down the end of your road. You could get I don't know. You could get all sorts of things. You could get fresh vegetables. So the eating habits, all that changed, and into that came the requirement of what would be sort of background from the '60s, which was pottery and stuff like that, which you could add into the mix. I want to say to you that a lot of designers, they forget the politics of the time. We're living through an extraordinary period at the moment, absolutely extraordinary volcanic period where people don't know how to spend their money because they don't know quite even where they're going to be. Even they don't know. There's a lot of not knowing at the moment, and I haven't been in. I've lived a long life, and I haven't been in this such strange area other than when the Vietnam War was on. That was a hugely big sort of drain on everything, which brought about a lot of Black culture, a lot of consciousness. I don't want to go too much on this, but it is an important part of my thinking. But you ask me that I must understand the sociology of what is in the script. It's not necessarily written in the script, but what is the thinking? And that's where Campion is. She puts her finger right on that button. She doesn't necessarily make films that are, about the period of that button, but
Yeah, right,
it
right,
is
right.
really to do with the way that we all generally live through it. I mean, and at the moment, uh, it's surreal. Trump is in town here, and it is this sort of circus of him in a gold carriage going down. I mean, this is crazy. Princes. I mean, it's madness. It's the requirement of the narcissist to be seen within sort of splendor of a country's who you rightfully got rid of.
Yeah.
It is a strange piece of that you have to say yesterday. The hundreds of thousands and thousands of people who were marching, the graphics on the signage that they had was fantastic. I mean, they're homemade. I mean, I have a art director friend who came into the industry. I found her because she would make signage she's a very proactive, um, woman within the women fight, for
Yeah,
rights.
right,
And,
right.
she's a very, very good designer of these because you have to if you're doing that, you have to be able to get the message across pretty quickly, and you have to so there we go. I don't know if you understand all that, but,
I definitely understand it and
Yeah.
agree. Living through it is bonkers. And all I can say is that in some years, the movies telling the story of our time right now will be extraordinary.
they will be because we will be seeing, I mean, there's extraordinary people in your history and our history. We went through, uh recently in the last 10 years, we went through 3 or 4 different prime ministers. I mean, it was just like crazy. Each one was a bigger lie than the last one. So the sense of, again, I wanted just last thing to say that morally, I was brought up to believe that there was a truth. No, that truth is only based around a colloquial truth, be it the church or, the local councillors or whatever. It's not a truth. I mean, it's just a behavioral thing of learning about it. But nobody knows anymore what it is. And everybody's very frightened of AI because they think AI is going to have the truth. It's going to have a form of truth, which is generated by us who, created the programming of it as it all. And it's going to be a very, very interesting professor. Now, I say all that in relation to holography because holography is a way of looking at the world. AI is going to really push holography where it couldn't be pushed previously because we didn't have. It will crunch everything down as it will do in science, push it all down so that we'll be able to move ahead more quickly in terms of whom we are, where we our consciousness. And there's a new consciousness which came with your birth in the 70s and it hasn't been respected yet, I don't think. I
Things are
should
moving
shut
faster
up.
and faster. No, it's
Well,
it's
I,
all
I doff my
interesting.
hat to you
Yeah.
then, new birth of new intelligence that is unrespected.
Well, this part of my designing. But
I keep telling my wife the same thing. Let's
on
talk.
that,
Let's talk about. Let's
Yeah,
talk
let's
about the movie.
let's shift gears and chat about the power of the dog here. And this I think might be the first time that we've actually had a guest on the show who didn't work on the film, but has worked with the director of the film before. And so I think that's an interesting perspective that you're bringing, knowing Jane Campion, knowing how she works, having seen that when you worked on the piano with her, and now coming to this film that is another period film, and definitely a strong character drama with a lot of interesting choices, beautiful setting, and a thread of darkness kind of going through it. It's a fascinating film to look at. And I'd love to at first just kind of get a sense as to what drew you to this as the film that you wanted to discuss today.
Power of the Dog is a bookend to the piano, in the sense that it is. I've just taken a few notes. If I'm looking down, it's because I'm looking at my notes. It really is a study of men alone in society. It's the loneliness of a male who's got a secret and trying to be normal, but in doing so, it's got a lot of anger. And Jane, this is an area that she psychologically understands a huge amount about. Well, it's amazing how much she is able to exhibit and show. It's a hard area to get into, but she does do that. So that she puts her finger right on that pulse. And, there's not a lot of people who have been able to do that. And Brokeback Mountain being another one that sort of looked into that area another. Now that, as we're three Blakes talking to each other, this area is uncomfortable for a lot of people to look at, because it's not it's not necessarily a lot of fun. And some people might think Power of the Dog's not a lot of fun to look at. And people know that it's because of the magnificence of the choices made of the locations, of the building of the sets and the beasts. So there's a lot of wilderness that is part of the psyche of Phil, who's the man alone and educated, wondering why, and we're wondering why. What is driving this guy to be so aggressively disturbing, I guess. So I'm sorry, I just have to. So we're immediately thrown into what Jane does out of interest when on the piano, the taking the finger off. That took place on the second day of filming. It wasn't consecutive. I mean, and none of us particularly knew that. And Jane, being Jane, said, "Okay, let's get rid of the funky finger, because everybody's wondering how we're going to do the finger. So let's turn over." And she knew the environment, what I'd built. He said that whole thing is, most of the film was shot in a studio, but all the exteriors were an effects stage. All those trees, all those burnt out dead trees, had spinner heads on the top, which could give us instant rain, but mud and all the rest of it. So we put the whole thing into action, rain coming down, all the rest of it. And so she likes to get you into the game immediately as filmmakers in her those around her. So the finger came off. We were all in a state of huge shock, but we saw the deities, and we saw the beautiful choice that Janet Patterson had made in the fabrics of the silk gray grain skirt, which comes up like that and envelops her.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely heartbreaking. And it's the sort of thing we see in warfare. We see it in Gaza. We see people sinking into the morass of shock. And that is, we were all in shock. We were all in shock. She was right. Get it on, get done with it. So she, again, in Out of the Dog, she throws us into the livestock, these powerful animals being driven through the countryside. Big landscapes. She tells us exactly, she just gets rid of, she tells us, this is where we are, this is where the film's going to be. So get used to it, because it's one big hell of a country. It's very beautiful, but it's got a reason why it's called Out of the Dog, and we'll come to that. But so we're immediately given the visual and the intellectual and the emotional landscaping into which we get thrown. And again, it's a man alone in that area.
Well, and that's, I find that to be, just as for comparison's sake, looking at Phil and how isolated and alone he is, in this film, right? Which, has driven him to this place where he has this very deep internal anger that he's kind of pushing out onto the world. And then you look at like Sam Neill in the piano, and you get it's a different sense with him, but there is still this sense of this isolated man who brings this woman and daughter to live with him, to marry down in a very isolated, lonely country. And so there is a similar sense of a searching for something. And Phil's is obviously very different, as we find out with Bronco Henry. But I find that to be an interesting comparison of that kind of lonely man trapped in this kind of isolated environment in both of the films.
You're very correct, Andy, because that is me. It's all the men in New Zealand. We are brought up in a very isolated part of planet Earth. We're expected to be as chic and smart and clever as anybody in New York or London. But we have this massive landscape with only, well, it now has 3.2 million or something like that. But I mean, when this is sort of said, it was maybe 1.5 million people. There's nobody. I mean, you could be, men could go out the back and be herding and not see anybody for days, weeks. Now, that is also well established in the American canon of movies, in the sense of the cowboy. And the cowboy story is absolutely elementary to my education on cinema. I grew up on the American cinema. Living in New Zealand, I had more American culture than British culture because it came quicker. So Road Runner and cowboy movies were part of my life. So that sense of fending for themselves, being in the company of other men, but being quite lonely within the company of other men, because so we were never given, we were always driven by a form of searching to try and find something worthwhile in what they were doing. Very often it was in the breaking in of a horse, or as we saw again in Our Good Dog, that there is a sense of tracking the impossible, the wild, the madness of being out there. So she lets that spirit out of the bottle, and it becomes, when we go inside, we see Phil, we see Peter, is it the kid? I think he's making paper flowers. Now that couldn't be more different. I mean, you cut from the wildness of the stockyards outside, cut into this delicate, beautifully shot scene of the tweezers going down and the cut paper that he's thought about making these, only for it to be burnt. I mean, for it to be, he's emasculated by this flame that Phil is able to do it. And in doing so, he frightens the rest of those at the table. All the men, they're just men, his stockmen who work with him. He without appalling them, but this is a sort of dictator quality that he's able to kill beauty. And that is what, the piano isn't all the same thing. She wants the piano. I mean, and Sam doesn't. I don't have a piano. I mean, okay, you can play the piano, and then he will, for greed, he will agree to the piano being sold to the Harvey Keitel character.
Yeah.
So the beauty goes out the door. She has to go to the beauty to be part of that beauty. So that is and Jane balances her beautiful femininity, her strength of womanhood, in not being afraid to tell the other side of the story, which is incredibly important, because the Kirsten Dunst character is a widow. She is considered available property for any man, as it were, because she hasn't got a partner, but she's got a son who is very bright. And we know he's very bright because we can tell that he has that quality that he's like a clown in the theater. I mean, they are. What are they doing? What role do these people have to play in life? Well, they are the outsider looking at the big picture.
Yeah, I think that's what's fascinating about the relationships of these characters is, and I was bringing up the relationship of or the sense of Phil as a comparison to Sam Neill's character, but you could really say George, Jesse Plemons' character, might be more of that, because he's it might be a little closer in comparison because he is kind of the lonely man also, just like his brother, who ends up marrying Rose because he's looking for something a little more in his life, and he brings Peter along. And the relationship between the four characters as we kind of explore the story is such that Rose feels kind of trapped and stuck and constantly threatened by Phil, and so she turns to alcohol. Phil, we know he's harboring his homosexual draw to his love for Bronco Henry, and he has his little secret spot, but he just rages at everyone else the rest of the time. George is afraid to try anything. Like Rose clearly wants to like dance and all this stuff. And he's just like, I can't do any of this. I want you to be playing the piano. I want you to be doing all this beautiful stuff. Bring beauty into my life because I'm not good enough for any of that. And then Peter is the one who is like, he is so smart and he tunes into everything. And the way that he takes the threats and everything, but finds ways to kind of turn that into his favor, I think is such an incredible and surprising element of the story that you just don't see on first watch. And then as you realize what's happening, it just kind of blindsides you and you're just like, wow. I mean, we know that he's smart. He's studying to like be a doctor and everything. We know that he's drawn to science and all of this stuff, but also to the art. But it's the ability to also read the people that I don't think I necessarily attributed with him immediately. And so you have such four interesting characters bringing so much to the story and kind of crafting this tale for us as we're watching them bounce off each other.
Again, in the piano, you have the child, the little girl,
Yeah.
who asks the questions. She's without any boundary. She asks the obvious questions. You've got a woman who's a selective mute, who is rather like a brother, who is a very he actually. His name is George, is it?
Yeah, George.
Like, he he's just every man. I mean, he's seen, he's heard, but he isn't. He just comes in and he knows the world can be. He can row his own boat. He knows all about that stuff, and he knows that he needs the warmth of Rose. He knows that he's happy to be within the intelligence of Phil. And he knows he's got this other thing called a brother. Now, I have three brothers, and brothers, I don't know if you have brothers, the two of you, but the brotherly love is a very particular blood love, which is a very refined, but sometimes quite troublesome in the sense that you think you should know them better, but of course, you don't know them that much better. In my case, I don't know them that much better. I know that I love them, they love me, but it kind of finishes that. We're all very, very, very different men. And this love between that Phil can't respect between what his brother brings into the house, and he wishes to live within the love of Rose and Phil, is that again, the Holly's Hunter character, here's this selective mute who's rather like Phil. She has a skill. She's forensic and her knowledge of how to control men in so many ways. So she can lead Sam on, or the Sam character on, to the point that his fulfillment will never be possible because he comes with a catechism of expectation, which she's a free spirit. Phil is a free spirit. These people make their own choices because they can see that in the future, or that in front of them, there's choices to be made. I mean, that's why I have thought about this, but I'm able to talk to you about it a little bit because I know Sam and I actually saw it together, the movie in London when it premiered in London. And we were virtually catatonic after the film together because we were so astonished by the depth of the explosion. I mean, that's all to do with aside of the incredible look of the film, the choices made of the cinematographer
Yeah.
and the costumes and the et cetera, and the music score, that haunting whistle that he has. Again, it's like the piano. It's all that same thing. And little history there. Jane, I'd introduced you to Michael Nyman, who's the composer on the piano. And Nyman is a concrete. I don't know if you know that term, but I mean it's a form of music which was coming out of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. It's a form of abstraction within music. So anyway, he was. They came together. Choices made, and I was with Jane. This is 3 months before he even turned over, and then through the post came a tape. Jane put it on, and she went ballistic. What the fuck? This is I want this sort of modern. She wanted to have what she wanted to have extraordinarily moving modern script, but she needed to have within that the tartans of Scotland. She needed to have the embroidery of the bagpipes, which is not in there, but I mean the music the lilting music that is never going to get. It's like the whistle in the dog, Hours of the Dog. I mean, because it's something which haunts you. And this, I mean, these are levels of consciousness that Campion brings into cinema that women actually bring. I'm going to make a big jump here just to say that I recently saw The Materialist, and this is a film about you maybe seen the film, but again, it's a brave film. It's a brave film because it looks at the politic of that which is commonplace for the last 20 years. Me of my art department have got married through this process and
Sure.
very successfully, but it's become somewhat tarnished in its history, and it's incredible looking at worth. I'm only
Yeah.
I won't be I can't. I'd like you, but I can't go out with you because you don't earn 200,000. Incredibly sorted in its script and its person.
Interesting.
You've got me still thinking about music and sound, and I want to make one comment that I don't think we've discussed yet, which is about Cody Smit-McPhee's portrayal of Peter that is so fascinating. I haven't read anything that says any of this is intentional, but you'd be hard pressed to convince me otherwise that he's not playing this character as coded autistic, certainly neurodiverse, right? His fascination with the sensory experience of the comb, his hyperfixation and deeply intense interests, his atypical social interaction, and deeply emotional complexity all underlies that sort of intelligence that he brings, but also is critical to his role as interventionist, emotional interventionist for Phil, and adds to that sort of third act kind of explosion, or I should say fourth act explosion, the quiet explosion on the death of Phil that I think is really fascinating. So much of this movie happens, it feels like 70% of the emotional weight of the movie happens in the last 20 minutes of it. And that makes the slow burn of the first 30% of the emotional weight of the movie that much more intense, made more intense by the sort of grating soundscape, by the incredible house that they have here. That house is extraordinary in the middle of the plain. All of these things, I feel like I have more time in this film to study what is happening, that I don't have to worry so much, or that by the time I get to the end of the film, I'm really on tenterhooks, but I've had time to really live in this universe. It's an extraordinary experience. Not as brutal as I think a lot of people characterize Phil. On this watch, I find him deeply complicated and mean, a meanness that is so beautifully articulated through masking of vulnerability.
Absolutely, and that is a character that is so flawed that we just haven't seen. We've seen it cloaked in earlier movies, maybe in the 50s or something like that. Incidentally, I re-looked at Giant recently, which is a movie from, I don't know,
Like
1957 or something.
56 or so.
Yeah.
And there you had the same house in isolation. There is a history of the Western bar, the Western street, the Western wood, the Western house on its own. Elizabeth Taylor in that film, I hadn't seen it for, I don't know, too long. She is extraordinary in that film because, again, it's a study of, and I'm not going to go very far on this, but it was an amazing to see that the bravery of that film in the study of human uh, ownership, supposed ownership, and the struggle against it all, and the way that Taylor turned the tables when she went over and took the blokes and said, "Can I be part of this conversation? What are you talking about, you guys?" And then she turns, and the women on the other side of the big living room, drawing room, that they're over there knitting away, doing that sort of womanly things, and
Right.
she just rips into them like Nina Simone, my friend.
Yes, right.
It's quite an I recommend you having a look at it because it's incredible acting in that film too. Um, and is again, the Campion is, she's able to be part of film history, which, of course, the remakes that are happening and that which is commonplace to the requirements of the globe, because there was a time when English-speaking films didn't travel. No one went to China or Indonesia or blah, 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 because no people didn't. And then it changed, and around about, well, I know that Aeon Flux was attempting, because Karen Kusama was half Japanese, so she was hoping that within the aesthetic, I would be able to give her some of that, which would assist in the viewing of it all. So we go right back as to why decisions get made and um, how you design a film. And the role of the, I'm just going to go, I mean, again, the cruelty that of whipping the horse. I mean, the horrible anger that is in. You seem really nice guys.
Oh,
Yeah,
thank
it
you.
would be hard
We-
to muster that kind
Yeah,
of.
yeah.
Also, the barehanded castration would be hard for me to muster too.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
it is a savage look. I mean, I remember going in. I was just starting with Spike pretty soon after that. Maybe 2 years after, and I was at a wonderful down in the not quite Upper City, but anyway, I was in a place actually interviewing my set decorator at the time, and I went to go to the lavatories, and I came out of it, and there was this table of like 4 men and 4 women. The men were incensed by the piano. They were raging against it all. They were just like, yeah, I mean, they felt emasculated by this film, that they were just like, how could anybody? And I was like, pie-eyed kid standing there going, what the hell? And the women were just sort of taking it like a wet flannel again. Okay, see, hey, it's yours. So I was astonished by how that behavior, which has become, again, it's come around again. So I'm afraid I don't want to go to it, but it's your country, and the killing last weekend of um, a young. I'm not even too sure whether the young man who shot the politician dead, whether his rage was. I don't know. I can't quite work that out. That is a sort of mystery of rage at the moment as to what, and a lot of it's to do with men, because a lot of it is from a politic that is rather like Phil. It's old-fashioned white male ownership, and it's not. It has little joy in it, and it's not. And I'll
And he
just give
doesn't
you.
know where he fits, right?
No.
He
Right.
does not know where he fits in the universe. He's uncomfortable in his skin.
Yeah, and he again, we see those top shots where he's up, she's playing the piano, and he's somewhere upstairs or somewhere in the belfry of the house of the work with his mandolin or something like this. I don't remember what it is,
Or
but he's
banjo, yeah.
banjo just pulling those strings, ding, 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 and it is so. Incidentally, the film was quite a melodrama too.
Yes. Yes, it is.
I also went to see a film that, as we're talking about film, a film that influenced my grandmother took me to see, Imitation of Life, Lana Turner. This is like, and it was the first time I'd never seen. I don't think a lot of people in America hadn't seen a black actress, and it was a very, very interesting melodramatic film. It's all about um, a full-blown Dunkirk melodrama, but shot in a way that was extraordinarily attractive and drew you in to the sorrows of that particular story. So we have a long history in cinema of all forms of they say there's only 6 stories. Well, each story has its own its own format in some ways
Sure.
to
Yeah.
do it. And I've tried, and you're quite right, Pete, to say that I have people quite often say to me, Andrew, you've chosen so many different films. You just seem to go from one, not to say that
One
you,
genre to the next. Yeah.
yeah. And I say, well, I came from that, and I like innovation. I like being challenged.
Yeah. Right.
Well, it's a beautiful collection of work, Andrew, and what an honor to have you sit down and talk through so much of it. And part of why we do this show is to talk about what it is that inspires the creators of our favorite movies when they watch movies, right? And to hear you wax so poetically about Power of the Dog is, it's inspirational for us too, for sure.
Thank you. I mean, I think I just love sharing this with you because the catechism of filmmaking is a big part, even of the economy. I mean, it's a part of us being generous as we can be about sharing creativity, and it's an affordable. It arose because people couldn't necessarily afford to go to the opera or this or that. It arose as public entertainment, and I always see it as public entertainment. I see people put their money down to be entertained in a way that's hopefully going to nourish
Yeah.
their minds and souls. So,
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
that's that people every year that these movies are made that do exactly that.
For sure.
Andy, where do you fit into the film industry? Sorry, I know what Pete. He's.
I I had been involved in producing. I got involved in kind of I worked as a line producer for a while. Working with the numbers and the logistics and making sure that everything came together. So a lot of fun, and I definitely enjoy that aspect of a
What interests
giant
you too
puzzle
about.
piece that you're constantly having to
Yeah.
re-put together.
Well, I'm
Those-
glad you sort of bring that up again. You are not, that role is not celebrated within film. The directors and the people get it.
Yeah.
You are the circus master that allows me, the designer, to actually, I go to you and say, okay, we can't afford to have another week in the studio. What are we going to do? Should we do it in the back lot? Should we go out when we're shooting some other part of the city we're in? Should we try and shoot it there? Or should we just add it to add it another set on the back of another set on the stage?
Right.
All those things, the mathematics of how to, how to afford to bring the imagination, and
Yeah.
we crack the nuts with you as to how to best do it so that people above us, you want to know how the hell are you going to do it at?
Yeah.
And you
Right.
have the answer because the costume designer and myself and the cinematographer, we've talked to each other and that is the sort of movie hopefully we will make. But you never know. I mean, making a movie it's a shit show. I mean, I studied the sciences. You've got your two petri dishes there, and you go from one to the other. What's the growth going to be? How's it all going
Yeah.
to turn? Who knows?
Right.
Yeah.
It goes into editing. They take what you thought was the front of the movie, it ends up the back of the movie, and they make it
Exactly.
a better movie. And
Yeah, right. No, the circus is a great way to describe it, but it's it delivers these amazing pieces of art and entertainment that we can all sit back and enjoy and find amazing things to discuss. So, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us here today to talk about this particular one of these amazing pieces of art.
thank you.
So before we go, Andrew, do you have anything you want to plug? Your website, any place people can look online to learn more about you and what you're up to, or your holography or anything?
Andrew McAlpine.net. I mean,
Okay.
please go on, have a look at that. I've always had a side hustle, and I'm a gardener, a major gardener. I love gardening, and got a big garden here in London. And for 27 years, I moved within the flower industry as a side hustle and I created the vending of flowers, bouquets of flowers on railway stations and then all over Europe, these units. Bottom line about that is the Chinese stole all my IP and they can build 4 units for the cost of one of my units. So all I have to do is take my hat up and go, fair enough, where you go. I can't
right.
compete with you, but it was a great journey. And it was always a little bit like, I've always had another thing going on. I mean, I do the movies, but I've always needed to have, it's part of my character. It's part of Peter McAlpine, I think. I mean, just something else going on.
Yeah.
Whatever. So, with happiness, if anybody wants to be in touch with me, I like talking to people. And I do these, I've done 3 this year past, one in Greece, one in Portugal, and I just finished one in Manila, where I talk, I like a TED Talk thing that formatted to people within the industry over a period of 2 or 3 days. And we talk about what we're talking about now, particularly to young designers starting up and stuff
Oh,
like that.
nice. Sure.
And I do that, and they do it at the film school here. I go through their portfolios and we judge it over a period of over the course of the 3 year over their postgrad years. So
Nice.
that's just part of the community.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's great. And giving
sure.
back, and it's an important part of everything. So, but we'll make sure all the links are in the show notes. Again, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. For everyone else out there, we hope you enjoy the show, and we certainly hope you like the movie like we do here on Movies We Like. Movies We Like is a part of the True Story FM Entertainment Podcast Network and the Next Reel family of film podcasts. The music is Chonk Clap by Aeon Flux. Find the show at truestory.fm and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Letterboxd at The Next Reel. Learn about becoming a member at thenextreel.com/membership. And if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, we always appreciate it if you drop one in there for us. See you next time.